Thanks. You may be seated. I'd like to welcome each one of you to this week's group of Imperfect Fathers Anonymous. I know sometimes it's difficult to come out to these situations, but the good thing is because we have co-ed CrossFit, many of you were able to come out because I realized that during the winter, during the female what is this? Zumba, thank you. You don't come out because you're afraid people will pick you out as an imperfect father. So if you're with us today as an imperfect father, welcome. What's exciting is many of you come and sometimes you're fearful to share, and we want to give you that opportunity. Some of us can look back and recognize over the course of our lives growing up, we were presented with images of perfect fathers. Some of you may be old enough, you really have to be old. Ozzie and Harriet, anybody? Yeah? Ward and June? Fred and Wilma? Anybody? Mike and Carol? Homer and Marge? Now that was not the perfect, right? Peter and Lois? Who's Bob and Helen Parr? Nice and loud. The Incredibles. Oh. What's interesting is in a support group for imperfect fathers, you may hear someone say, it's been 21 days since I punched the wall. It's been 16 days since I yelled at my kids. It's been 15 days and 23 hours since I dropped the F-bomb. It's been 13 days since I watched porn. 6 days since I flipped someone off in traffic. What's interesting is Mother's Day, you come to church and we say to moms, you are great, you rock. Father's Day, you come to church and we say you're a failure and you can't be good enough. I want us to celebrate Father's Day today with the realization we're celebrating imperfection. We're celebrating imperfection. If fathers were supposed to be perfect, then we wouldn't need a God. So as a father, as fathers, we want to celebrate imperfection while we strive for perfection? No, because we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect. We want to celebrate imperfection as we strive to be less than perfect. So dads, happy Father's Day. You have the power of influence. You have the power of influence. What is influence? What is influence? Influence, the capacity to have an effect on the character development and behavior of someone. That influence can be negative or positive. Imperfect dads, I want today to be a message of hope. Moms, wives, children, if you're expecting perfection, you probably got the wrong guy, and he doesn't exist. But I don't want today's message to ever be used as an excuse for you to say, you see, I'm not perfect. I want today's message to be an opportunity for you to come to the realization that I'm imperfect, but tomorrow I can be less imperfect than I am today. So I want you to celebrate the power of influence of imperfection. Celebrate the power. Some of you may remember this, right? What is this? Right? Ladies and gentlemen, especially gentlemen in this room, if you have a relationship with the God of the universe through Jesus Christ, you got the power to be less perfect tomorrow than you are today. To be less perfect tomorrow than you are today. When we allow God, the perfect Father, to father us broken individuals as dads, we become better imperfect fathers. How many of you have ever strived and you're going for that place where I want to be better, I want to be better. I grew up in a church system where I honestly thought these men were perfect. And like the Ward and June, or the Ozzie and Harriet especially, Ozzie and Harriet, as they were presenting this image, and some of you are way too young, I'm sorry, but their son, Ricky Nelson, was addicted to drugs. So I want us to stop striving for perfection and start enjoying the next step of less imperfection. See, the cool thing, maybe 6-7 months ago, I went before God and said, you know what, God? I have a crude mouth. I need your help. And I watched over the last 6-7 months as God, through his Spirit, cleansed some of the things that were coming through my mouth. Some of us look back as dads, and you're here today, and you say, you know what? I was an imperfect dad, and I left some significant scars on my kids. Today, my kids suffer because of the way I parented them. And you know what? That may be the fact, but today you can receive forgiveness, freedom, and let go of that. In our home, in our bedroom, we have a place, a special place. Saying, hi, my name is Sal. I'm an imperfect father. And it's been 6 years since I punched the wall. So I remember way back yonder in our old house in our bedroom, something happened, and I want to blame it on everything else. But my immaturity, my lack of self-control, my lack of following the Spirit, I remember punching a wall, hitting a wall. And what's beautiful and what's interesting is they make pictures to cover those types of holes. But a picture will never cover the memory of your son. Especially when you move out of the house and you take the picture off the wall and he says, oh, remember that, Dad? Now, I can fake it and pretend I got all my stuff together, and I can pretend that you all have it together, but I know that men, we don't. And women and children, I am not giving an excuse to us as dads to be perpetually unhealthy. But I can never, ever propagate perfection. Now, we can follow a perfect God. We can follow the perfect Father, but we will always fall short because of our humanity. But we can say, God, I surrender to you today. That's our goal. So dads, I want today to be a step of freedom. I want today to be a step of bonding in your family. I want it to be a step of release of the past. I believe wholeheartedly that there's something so huge in our responsibility as dads, yet so powerful because of who God is, that we can do this. We can do this. So what I want to do is I want to give you the way to, the want to, and the how to. The way to, the want to, and the how to. And I'd like you to look with me at Psalm chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. Psalm 12, 1 through 6. It's on page 523 in the Bible in the pew. Maybe you have a smartphone. I would encourage you to download the YouVersion app. They have some phenomenal reading plans. But we're going to look at Psalm 112. And we're going to see as the psalmist gives us some places, some areas, some ways that we can grow in that deeper relationship with God and the reasons we want to and the results of doing so. So Psalm 112, verses 1 through 6. How joyful are those who fear the Lord and delight in obeying his commands. And one version says, how joyful is the man who fears the Lord. Now let me ask you this, men in this room. How many of you in the last week used the word joy or joyful? The last 3 weeks. The last 5 weeks. 20 weeks. 52 weeks. Right? Now, as a pastor, I use it. Joyful has this connotation of soft, has this connotation of, I don't know. And at times we think that phrase, that concept, is for individuals who can walk on water and just float above everything. But God is saying the imperfect person can experience a joy internally that changes their life. And I want to encourage you as men, me as a man, and other young boys in this room to realize that joy is a wonderful thing to experience. Although the concept of joy is dwarfed today by the concept of happiness, because how many of you, I just want to be happy. You get up every morning thinking, I just want to be happy. And the reality is joy is more important. So why? Why? Because when we follow God, when we obey his commands, when we understand that he has a plan and purpose for our lives, and he markets, works with, and is deeply involved with recreating imperfect people, that we have hope. See? When I come to this place of saying, God, I'm an imperfect daddy, I'm never going to do it perfectly. I'm going to try to follow you. I'm going to surrender to you. And as a result, I'll have joy in my gut. Way down in the depth of my being, I'm going to have this weird peace that says I'm broken and screwed up, but I'm okay because I'm less broken and screwed up than I was yesterday, and I'm going to be less broken and screwed up than I was today, tomorrow. So as a dad, I have to be able to embrace the reality that, God, I want you first in my life. And as a result, some of the byproduct will change the way I live, the way I love, the way I interact. God, it's been 14 years since, and the days between get longer. He goes on, and he talks about the individuals who obey, who fear, who experience that joy. As a result, their children will be successful everywhere. An entire generation of godly people will be blessed. Some of you sit in this room today and you had somebody before you, a parent, a dad, a mom, who kind of told you about God, maybe even took you to church or gave you some of those Bible principles. And as a result, you may not have jumped in with both feet in the beginning, but you're beginning to walk on that journey. And there's something in the previous generation that's influenced your thinking in this generation. And so too, we have the responsibility, the awesome responsibility, and we got power to help influence the next generation of godly children, of godly people who will be blessed. Why do I want to follow you, God? There's way too much to say. Why do I want to follow you? Because my positive influence will aid in producing successful kiddos. What's a successful kiddo? Well, they get good grades, they get into the right schools, they make the right money. It's not what a successful kiddo is. A successful kiddo is a real person, a young person who realizes, I'm not perfect, but there's a perfect God who loves me unconditionally, and if I'm willing to open my heart to receive from him the direction, then my life can totally be different on this earth. And it's a lot easier for me to do that because I'm watching Dad and Mom do it. It goes on in Psalm 12, and the psalmist says, you know what? They also will be wealthy, and their deeds will last forever. And it's interesting because in this type of situation in a church, there are some on television that say, if you give to the ministry, you will be blessed. I think we'll try that. You know what? Get the offering plates. I'm just kidding. But here's the deal. When you do things God's way, obedience brings what? Blessing. They themselves will be wealthy, and their good deeds will last forever. This is the want to. Anybody want to be wealthy? And you're thinking, okay, how does this relate to the Bible? If you got 4 kids, and those 4 kids have different abilities with managing money. You got one, money's always burning a hole in his pocket. The minute it comes in, it's gone. You got another kid who's a little bit better, but still isn't quite the way they need to be. You got a third. Let's say the 4th kid has short arms and deep pockets. You ever heard that phrase? Very, very frugal, very wise. When you're ready to drop, who are you going to leave your money to? Who's going to be the executor of your estate? Probably the one with the most wisdom. And sometimes we miss the reality that God wants to bless us. Why? So we can do good deeds. His greatest desire is to give it to the children who have proven to him that they obey his principles, follow him, and are willing to bless others. Why do I want to follow God? Dads, why do we want to do things his way? Because I'll have economic blessing and I can help others? Now, is that an absolute drop dead yes? I believe obedience brings blessing. And being wealthy isn't having all you want. Being wealthy is being content with what you have and being wise with it. So as we as dads look at our lives, look at our hearts, look at the way we're influencing our kids, they learn from us. I want to drop dead someday, and I want the deeds that I did while I was alive to last forever. I want people to continue to be influenced from my life on this earth long after I'm gone. And if I am no longer living, then I pray that my child, I pray that your children would embrace those principles so that it lives through them to their generation and to the next generation. Light shines in the darkness for the godly. They are generous, compassionate, and righteous. Generous, compassionate, and righteous. Why do I want to follow God? Why do I want to be less imperfect tomorrow than I am today? Because when I follow God's principles, I will never be directionless, and I will be generous, compassionate, and righteous. Now, we look at this stuff, and this is stuff you're supposed to hear in church, but I promise you, gentlemen, we almost need an imperfect fathers group so that we can sit around in a room and get to the place of honesty and say, I am broken, but I've been fearful to tell anyone. I'm struggling with this. I've done this. I can't overcome this. And then other individuals who, too, understand their brokenness, their imperfection, can come alongside of you and say, brother, you know what? Let me show you how the power of God can change you. And when you're changed, whoa, goes through the house. I'm not sure if one of the most beautiful things you can hear or the worst thing you can hear is your adult son say, why weren't you like this 15 years ago when I was growing up? I'm so thankful I'm not who I was. But wow, do I grieve at times over who I was. But I thank God that he never expected perfection. He expects surrendered imperfection. He expects us to come before him and to say, God, I blew it at one time, and I'm going to blow it again, but I'm not going to live in the guilt and the shame. And if I were supposed to be perfect, then I wouldn't need a Jesus. I can't put my shoes on in the morning without your help. And God, when I get to the concept and the reality that I need you for the simplest of things, it changes everything about my life. So dads, we imperfect. We messed up. The quicker we admit it, the quicker we're willing to seek forgiveness from those in our past and embrace the power and the principles of God in the present, holy crow future, the next generation, our kids will see a change. You may think it's too late. It's not. If your kiddos are still breathing, if you're still breathing, you have the ability to re-impact them positively by admitting your imperfection and allowing the Spirit to indwell and to change you in such a way that they see an individual who's generous, compassionate, righteous. And righteous isn't self-righteous, like, yeah. No. Righteous is this realization that I am so messed up. Without the righteousness of Almighty God, of Jesus Christ, I can never be what he would have me to be. He goes on, the psalmist, he says, you know what? Good comes to those who are what? And conduct their business fairly. Think of the individuals who impacted your life. Think of maybe your dad, or think of a masculine leader. Did your dad or a masculine leader, were they an individual who were fair and generous and conducted themselves in a way that was honorable? Or were you involved with an individual who, whenever the opportunity came for them to make a little more than the other, or to one up, or whatever it was in that business situation, who are you today? Does some of that permeate your mind? Because what happens teaches. And some of us may lack character, may lack integrity, because what was modeled for us, what became truth to us, impacted us negatively. It doesn't mean that it has to continue to the next generation. What it means is that God is saying, you know what? If you obey, if you live in reverence, and if you live in obedience, and if you live in the reality that, God, your way is always better than my way, then good will come to you, because you will be generous and you will conduct your affairs in an honorable fashion. The want to? Why would I want to do this? Why? Because if I obey, I will be blessed. I think you know that I have been trying to indoctrinate you with a phrase over the last month. And that phrase is obedience brings blessing. One more time. Obedience brings blessing. You know why? Because I pray that when you get to that fork in the road, and there's this internal thing that says, go this way, but there's this supernatural God thing that says, go this way, that you will be put to the place where you come to the realization that obedience always brings blessing. I was thinking about imperfection and imperfect dads. Even the stage up here for me only breeds imperfection. John did a great job, and this is part of our working together here. But you know what? I have never shot an animal. I have never wanted to shoot an animal. I had a brother-in-law who hurt my sister once. I did chase him and almost shot him, but he outran me. This is a bow, I know that. First service, I couldn't figure out which way you hold it. Any non-hunters in here? Anybody listen to other men as they talk about hunting and they're all like, woo? No, I prefer to cook chicken breast with a little marsala. I remember when my son was young, he had an interest in this type of stuff. So I found some quality men to influence him. But I wanted to treat my son to a new bow. He was just a little tyke. I went to Dick's, and I told the man how old my son was, and the man told me it was a 15-pound bow. So I picked it up off the counter and went like this. If you're not laughing, then you were like me, because now I'm confused again. This is the 15-pound draw. Here's where I'm at. We live in a culture where if you breathe, you're not good enough. There's something out there you have to buy, something you have to do to actually meet some standard by which you're judged by. And dads, we have bought into this thing where we're not perfect, so we've given up and said the heck with it. Or we're not perfect, and we try to make everybody think we are. And what happens behind closed doors is causing heartache and pain. Some of you in this room may have never met your dad. And you wonder, can I be thankful? Can I honor him? Well, you know, you may not know that situation, but you can say thank you to God for the fact that your dad existed so that you have life. Some of you, maybe you were deeply wounded by dad. Maybe dad didn't follow some of those biblical principles, or maybe he did and he struggled. Because I have met some great men who struggle emotionally, mentally. And the struggle sometimes overflows into his family's lives. And maybe there was some harm caused. At some point, we have to let dad off the hook. And again, moms and kids, I am not saying accept an attitude of unhealthy imperfection. I'm saying moms and kids, accept an attitude of healthy imperfection. My dad right now is doing the best he knows to do with what he has. Maybe he's not. Maybe you can pray that he would. Maybe you can encourage him. Dads in this room, we can do this. There's too much at stake for us not to do this. So this Monday night, 6 o'clock, we're going to have our first meeting of the, just kidding. But you know what? If my schedule allowed, I really wish we could. He goes on, the psalmist. He says, such people will not be overcome with evil. Those who are righteous will be long remembered. Those who are righteous will be long remembered. In our everyday lives, we're brought to those forks, and we want God's direction of which way to go. We want to be obedient, because obedience always brings, and we want our kids to experience the blessing of us being blessed. But we have those challenges at times. And what the psalmist is saying, he's saying, you know what? I will have God's supernatural power to fight and win the battles of everyday life. The battles I fight in 2019. Is it 2019? Okay. The battles I fight in 2019 aren't the battles I fought in 2015. And I am so thankful. It's not because I got it together, but it was because I was able to experience God's supernatural power. As I said, God, I'm imperfect, and I don't want to be any longer in this area. So I want to be less imperfect in that area tomorrow. And he answers those prayers. Those who are righteous will be long remembered. The memory of me will be positive and powerful. 50 years, 30 years, when my kid has to sit around and talk to his kids about his father, their grandfather. My son, if he wanted to, could have a phenomenal list of all the imperfections of my life. So can yours probably too. But I pray that the less imperfect I become and have become will be a greater influence, so that when it's time to be long remembered, you know what my dad taught me? You know what my dad showed me? You know what I remember about my dad? And it's all those things that will help his kids take that next step towards saying, I want to follow God. The dads in this room, please know this. God has given you the power. Do you believe that? Hey, if you don't believe it, the song says it, right? So what do you want your kids to be? What do you want your kids to be? I want my kid to be Christ-centered, biblically anchored, and world changers. Now, that sounds kind of old-fashioned in today's society. But I want my kids to know that there's a God who loves them, and I want them to love him. I want you to want your kids to know, what does the Bible actually say? What does the Bible actually say? And I want your kid not just to punch a clock. I want your kid to punch a clock, and wherever he's punching a clock, I want there to be a power of influence that changes the lives of people. I want my kid to be a world changer, not just exist. Go to work, pay the bills, buy something, sleep, complain. I want your kids to experience power. And when you experience the life-changing power from imperfection to less imperfection, your kids will see that power working in you and say, wow, the old man's changed. Maybe it can do something for me too. So the how-to. A couple of quick steps. You have placed in your bulletin. I think this is important. Expose your kids to the joy of knowing God personally. What does that mean? That means, that word again, but I'm a man. I'm not supposed to use the word joy. Now, joy is that internal peace, that surrender, that understanding. God, you got it covered. I want my kid to know that there's perfect peace that will protect my mind, because I will not be convinced otherwise, because I trust him. I want my kid to see a dad who doesn't tell him what to do, but models it. I want you to be parents. When your kids get up in the morning, it's not CNN, it's not Fox, it's not Facebook. Yeah, I got to tiptoe quietly because mom's having her quiet time, dad's having his quiet time. Quiet time, another old-fashioned concept. What is it? Just like fish do what? Birds what? Christians connect with God. So there's a strong probability that if your exposure to God as a dad isn't confirming the personal joy of that relationship, that there's a high probability your kids are not going to see that and desire it. And that's not a guilt-laden statement. That's a power-filled statement that says, you know what? Just go before God and say, okay, God, I got to start this thing. Show me where. Show me how. The how-to? Expose your kids to the right environment. Who are your friends, dads? See, we want our kids possibly to go this way, but we hang out with people like this. And the people like this who may not have self-control in certain areas in their life, or they may not have a God focus, and we may be very, very close with them. And we're trying to figure out why our kids really aren't gravitating towards wanting God, because they have all these influences in their life, and some of the influences are not building and reinforcing what you're trying to build and reinforce in their lives. So you need to pick the environment in which your kids are going to grow up within. Who are your friends? Because you can say, I want this for you, son. I want this for you, daughter. But if the friends who you're hanging with are doing not those things, there's a strong probability that what you say has no power, because what you do is dwarfing your word. Walk with the wise and become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. Suffers harm. Another how-to. You ready? Expose your kids to the difference between what culture says and what God says. Right and wrong. Holy and unholy. Biblical and unbiblical. God's way and the world's way. They're all different. But nobody wants to hurt anybody. Nobody wants to say, this is sin, this isn't sin. Help your kids understand, what does the Bible say? I grew up in a culture where God doesn't want you to do that. This is what you should be doing. Well, why? Help me understand it. I have some valid questions. Don't just tell me, but explain to me, lead me. So when your kid comes to you and they're struggling, and you can sit and explain to them with the greatest of ease, because God says you won't be in the dark. He'll give you direction on your path. And say, you know, I don't have the answer, but I'm going to find it. Or you know what? This is the way everybody does it in today's culture. But God is saying this is what's best. He's the one who created you. He is the one who has a plan and a purpose. So, you know, putting my 14-year-old daughter on birth control probably isn't the best choice, because it only confirms that I don't have the handle. I haven't modeled. I haven't reinforced. And I haven't taught well. To tell my boy to carry something in his wallet. And this is permeating culture today. Because there aren't those values that say God has something huge for you. God has something huge for you. Expose your kids to the difference between what culture says and what God says. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Good and pleasing and perfect. Another how-to. Expose your kids to the presence and power of God in church. What does that mean? I have this little soapbox, and because it's Father's Day, I get to stand on it. Are we going to church today? That should never be a phrase that your kids utter out of their mouth. Well, that's because you're legalistic and old-fashioned. No, that's because I believe in my heart that church is not a destination, but it's an identity. I am a follower of Jesus. I'm proud of it. And I go to church on Sunday to connect with other followers, to hear some music that directs me to him. And maybe every now and then the guy spits something out that directs me back to following God. I want you to have a fighting chance in this world. And the only way you're going to have a fighting chance is when me, as your dad, prioritizes the reality that if I take 1 hour out of 167 a week and I expose you to something that says God has power, it might sink in deeper than my imperfect example to you. So you know what? Church is important, folks. You know what else is important? You know what else is important? Expose your kids to the thrill of being used by God. Why are we taking 28 people? How many people? Anybody in here? How many people are going to James Project? How many numbers? 31, is it? 30 people are going to the James Project. Why are we sending 30 people to work with a bunch of developmentally disabled people who nobody in a real world cares about because they're marginalized? Because we care in our world. Because we were created for service. We were created to help others. And you know what? I remember as a young pastor being so financially limited, we couldn't do vacations. But we would take our kid with us. And we'd go to a mission trip to West Virginia. We'd go to this mission trip. We'd go there. And everywhere we went, our family vacations were always focused around helping somebody else. Because that's the depth of why we were created. But now, we jump in a car, we get in a plane, we buy a resort, we go to vacation, and everybody gets there. And if anybody's gone on vacation, and I say this with greatest amount of love, sometimes vacation is chaos. Because you have 3, 4, 5 people all with a different desire in their heart of what's going to make them happy on that vacation. Well, I want to do this. I want to go here. I want to do there. When you learn to train your family to serve and you understand the beauty of helping somebody else, everybody in that situation are focused around the reality that I'm going to help somebody else, and your family will find the thrill of being used by God. I can't tell you how many young families have come down to the building, and how many of the children are filthy, dirty, an absolute mess, but with smiles from ear to ear, because there is something thrilling about being used by God. But honestly, some of your kids need to be exposed to serving down there, but you don't want to do it. And so often, serving others is dirty. And I promise you, you expose your kids to church on a regular basis. You expose your kids to serving others, and you will see their hearts move from selfishness and entitlement to others' focus and desire to follow God. Worship the Lord alone. Obey him and always be faithful. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. You can do what you want. But as for me and my family, we will serve. So, dads, if you want your kids to be successful, financially blessed, godly, generous, compassionate, righteous, and long remembered positively, a mouthful right there. When I walk in the cemetery, I had the privilege and heartache of doing a burial yesterday in a cemetery. And as we're standing there, these group of individuals who are with knew people who are underneath the stones. And we're making comments about those individuals. I pray that when I'm underneath my stone, body is anyway, I'm actually in heaven, that I will be long remembered positively. But you know what I really hope? That when my kid drops dead, when your kid drops dead, they will be long remembered positively because they were Christ-centered, they were biblically anchored, and they were a world changer. They changed the world in which they lived. If you want it to happen, you have to lead them to it. You have to lead them to it. Some of the dads in here today, you've been living with this imperfect life and the results of being an imperfect father. And it's time for you to say, God, I accept your forgiveness for what has been done through me to my children, to my family. And today, I commit to being less imperfect than I was yesterday. And God, I commit to following you so that I can be less imperfect tomorrow than I was yesterday. And as a result, it's not about telling your family where they need to do or what they need to do. It's about leading them there. And I believe it's going to take some time, but we are going to see a generation of young people and young families in Waymart and the surrounding communities because of your surrender today, tomorrow, and in the future. And I don't think that we're just going to exist as a church. I think we are going to blow the world apart in this community because God has given us the power. God has given us his Spirit. God has given us other imperfect people to hang out with who will love us where we are but help us get where we need to be. And I promise you that if you say yes to him, you will see not only your world change, your kids' world change, and the community change. Father, thanks for your love and your grace. Thank you for the awesome opportunity and the power that you have given us to be imperfect people in an imperfect world, following a perfect Father to a place of less imperfection tomorrow. God, we surrender ourselves and we say, I want to, I have to, and God, you've given me the tools to, so count me in. I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. I'm going to ask you to stand if you would. Dads, we had a bunch of kiddos serving this past week, and we made chocolate-covered pretzels. If you have a peanut allergy, we have peanut allergy-free pretzels. Peanut allergy-free pretzels. We have Oreo-covered pretzels. So they will be available at the back door and at the side doors. I'm thrilled that you're with us today. Join us next week. We're going to be talking about heroes. We're going to be talking about heroes, and inside of every one of us, there's this hero. I'll take off my shirt, but I have a stain. No, I'm just kidding. Inside of every one of us, there's a hero waiting to come out, and I believe God wants to show us how to make that happen. Let's worship and focus and give great gratitude to our God, because that's where our power comes from. Hey, imperfect dads, happy imperfect Father's Day. Go and be less imperfect tomorrow. God bless you all. Have a beautiful Father's Day.